Episode 2 of Top Prospects here at Penn State Sports Night. I'm Logan Bourandas alongside Chris Lemmo, and it's only been a week. We're still in the MLB offseason, and there is a lot of news that went down. And starting out with who Chris called the big kahuna in the last episode, Trevor Bauer. Everyone thought it was going to be the New York Mets. It was looking like Trevor Bauer to the Mets. It was even reported by Bob Nightingale yesterday that Trevor Bauer signed with the Mets. And he did a complete 180, seemingly at the final minute. He signed with the LA Dodgers, the reigning World Series champion LA Dodgers, to a 3-year contract with 2 opt-outs after the first 2 years. Now, Chris, before I rant as a Mets fan a little bit, what were your initial thoughts to this?
Well, my initial thoughts, my personal feelings on Trevor Bauer. I'm not a Trevor Bauer guy. Like Trevor Bauer, the person is just annoying. I mean, I'm sure you'll go off on that whole thing that he did later. But Trevor Bauer, the player, to me, I mean, he put up, don't get me wrong, he put up great numbers this year. I'd like to see him do it over, more consistently, over a couple seasons. He has yet to put back-to-back seasons, I believe, where he's had an under 4 ERA. And then, of course, there's the whole thing about how I believe this was last year, he kind of explained basically how you can manipulate the baseball, which, I mean, I get everybody. A lot of people use pine tar, but how you could do that to increase your spin rates, and then his spin rates magically go up, which seems like a little bit more than a coincidence. But, I mean, look, if the Dodgers got the pitcher that he was this shortened season, then yeah, it's a good signing. I don't know though. In terms of the amount of money, I believe. Let's see. The Dodgers was what, 102 million? Was that the term? I believe. I'm not 100% sure on that. Yeah, it just seems like a little bit much for me. I mean, maybe again, the Dodgers have an endless amount of money, so spending 40 million this year on one player is nothing to them. But yeah, I think it's an overpay. And again, they had to do it to get their guy. But you just never know what you're going to get from Trevor Bauer, in my opinion.
Yeah, the term was 3 years, $102 million. But I think just the way he went about this offseason, I get he was kind of trying to help out his brand a little bit. And then a couple days ago, his agent said it was down to 2 teams. And I think everyone kind of assumed that the Mets are going to be one of them. I think it was still kind of up in the air with who the other team was going to be. But my problem with this whole signing was that every single reporter was basically saying Trevor Bauer to the Mets. There was rumors about the deal's going to be closed in a couple hours. One reporter even said it flat out had happened. And on Trevor Bauer's website, he had LFGM, and then there was a link to merch for Mets merch. And a bunch of people bought the merch. And then a couple hours later comes out that Trevor Bauer signed to the Dodgers, and he deletes that little link to the Mets merch. And a lot of people were disappointed with the overall move in general, because there are people who actually bought that merch. There are people who thought that Trevor Bauer was going to sign with the Mets and they were going to get free merch, not free merch, but they were going to buy merch for Trevor Bauer. And I think he tried to make some money, which I get it from a business perspective. Obviously, you want to try and make as much money as you can. I just think the move was a little confusing, in my opinion. Just the way they went about this offseason. They waited up until a couple weeks before spring training to even get the deal done. And once it got done, the way it finished, I just think from a baseball perspective, it wasn't right, in my opinion. And part of this could just be me being a Mets fan. Part of this could be me actually wanting Trevor Bauer this offseason. But I know a lot of people are disappointed with how that ending was handled. And looking at the Dodgers right now, what they get, they're getting at least probably 2 years of Trevor Bauer. And you kind of mentioned his productivity. Last year, he won the Cy Young, but he didn't play in a full season. He had a great season in the 60 games, yes, but he's had mostly a career 4 ERA to this point in his career with Cleveland and Cincinnati. And now being not the guy on a rotation, being probably the 2 or the 3, however you want to order Buehler, Kershaw, and Bauer in that rotation. Now the pressure's a little bit off of him. But personally, I think that Trevor Bauer was always going to go home. He's an LA guy. He's from the area. He went to college in UCLA. Personally, I just think that it was always going to be one of the Dodgers or the Angels in his mind, and he was just using the Mets to get a little more money from the Dodgers. Personally, I think that's just the way it happened. I don't think he really was ever interested in the Mets. The Mets offered him the most money out of any team, but he took the hometown discount. So that's just how I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said it. First of all, basically, the Dodgers are getting 2 years because if you look at the contract, I believe the option on the third year is 17 million, and if he's pitching well, there's no way he's going to take that. He would opt out after the 2022 season. So basically, if he's any good, it's a 2-season contract. And he had said before that he likes to sign, 1-year contracts. So that's not surprising that he went shorter on the deal. Like you said about him going home, I kind of thought it was going to be the Angels. I really did. I mean, the Dodgers were already up against the luxury tax, and I know the Dodgers have money, but I didn't think that they were going to be willing to absolutely blow through the luxury tax like they just did. And two, the Dodgers have, if you look at the free agents for next year, they got to re-sign Clayton Kershaw, who's making 31 million this year. I mean, I don't know how much he'll make next year, but he's up after this season. Kenley Jansen's also up after this season. Corey Seager's up after this season. Bellinger is going to get a big raise, of course, through arbitration. So they've got some guys that they've got to re-sign. And I mean, Trevor Bauer is eating, I believe next year so far, they've got 120 million, 125 million on the books. And he's eating 45 million of that, which, by the way, and we'll go into this later, but I do think if you look at what Trevor Bauer is making, he's making more than the Pittsburgh Pirates' entire payroll, which is just ridiculous. And I want to go into this later, but it is time for there to be a payroll floor and a payroll ceiling in baseball. I mean, for teams to be spending like $40 million, like, I'm sorry, but then the owner should be forced to sell the team. It's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous because then you get teams that, their owners don't care about money, which is fine. But, then they're willing to spend 250 million. But then, again, you should not have teams spending 40, $50 million on payroll for a season. It's just absurd. I mean, they need to have a floor. But anyway, back to Trevor Bauer. Yeah, the Mets, the whole Mets merch thing, it's part of his personality. I mean, it's funny. I saw there was a tweet that somebody said, he wanted to reveal it on YouTube, which, like, okay, whatever, man. I mean, and somebody was like, this is like if Gordon Hayward wanted to do the reveal on ESPN. Like, stop. You're not even close to the best player in baseball. Like, I don't want to hear it. Like, go do it on your own YouTube channel, but stop acting like you're the next, like you're Mike Trout. You're not. Okay. I mean, he's not a top 10 player in baseball in my mind. So Jacob deGrom is better. If Jacob deGrom wanted to do that, go ahead, because he, in my opinion, is probably the best pitcher in baseball. But yeah, his personality, Trevor Bauer, the person, is not the kind of guy I'd want on my team, but Trevor Bauer, the player, I mean, the Dodgers got a good player for sure.
Yeah, I think in any other free agency class, Trevor Bauer would not have been the best free agent out there. But just because of who he was going into this free agency with, yeah, JT Realmuto, we talked about him in the last episode where he just kind of went back to his own team. And there was George Springer who went somewhere else. And I think Trevor Bauer might have been that top guy. But I think looking more into the Mets side of this, the real MVP on the Mets might have been Tomas Nido based off how he handled this. if you looked at his Twitter account during this, he was just kind of begging for Trevor Bauer to sign. He was kind of like the rest of us, just asking for answers, being mad at Bob Nightingale like any other human being. And I think the thing you said about Trevor Bauer and his YouTube channel, I don't think he's a top. He might be a top 5 pitcher in the game today. He might be. That might be a stretch even coming off a Cy Young year, because you can. It really depends on how much you take that last season where it was just a 60-game season. And you mentioned the salary floor, the Pittsburgh Pirates thing. That was kind of pretty funny where that stat came out. And there are some teams that just don't like spending money. That's what all Moneyball was about with the Oakland Athletics. You got Tampa Bay, who just never seems to want to keep a guy with a big salary. They just traded Blake Snell this offseason. So I think that's definitely something to consider for the future. And going a little bit to Trevor Bauer for a second, I think it'll be interesting to see if he has another Cy Young season now in a full season. And if it's a lot better than his last season, would he decide to opt out? Because there was an opt out after that first year. Would he decide to opt out, and instead of getting 45 million, you can maybe get 50 plus million if you were to be a free agent after the season? Maybe you can get a Cy Young, win a World Series with one of the best teams in all of baseball, and use that to make some more money, maybe go to the Mets. That's something maybe Trevor Bauer can do. Given his personality, we all know Trevor Bauer has one of the more wilder personalities in the MLB. Maybe that's something he can do. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, he could, especially if we start seeing, kind of a rebound and fans are allowed in and owners are going to be starting to want to spend more, at least for some teams, then yeah, I mean, maybe if he has a great year again, he does opt out. I mean, 50 million would seem a little absurd, but it seems like every year we kind of keep breaking records here. So I wouldn't shut that out of the realm of possibility right now. But yeah, I mean, Trevor Bauer, look, I like you said about him being a top 5 pitcher. Maybe. Again, I kind of have to see it for, I don't know. I'd rather see it for a prolonged period of time. Like Jacob deGrom, you have that track record now. We don't have that for Bauer. A lot of these seasons he's had like a 4+ ERA, and he's shown flashes, in those seasons where he looks great, but he really has only had 1.5 seasons where he was really good. Um, and my personal opinion on the Dodgers rotation is, first of all, I'm a big Walker Buehler person, big Walker Buehler guy, and he has proven it in the playoffs to me that he is a amazing pitcher. I mean, amazing pitcher, and that is what separates very good from amazing pitchers. And Trevor Bauer, I'd have to go through his stats, but I don't know. I mean, there's nothing to me that says that he is going to be as clutch as Walker Buehler is. So you can make an argument that he is not as good as even 2 of the pitchers on that staff. I mean, now that more says more about how good that staff is, but Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler are very good pitchers. So it'll be interesting to see where Trevor Bauer slots into that rotation. I'm thinking maybe 2 or 3. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah, I think there's no chance you can replace Walker Buehler at that number 1 spot. I think he's pretty much set at 1. And I think maybe they'd go Trevor Bauer at 2. And it's a toss up between 2 and 3, because Clayton Kershaw obviously is one of the best pitchers in this decade. But will they decide to give the highest paid pitcher in all of baseball that number 2 spot? That's crazy when you take a look at that rotation and say that the highest paid pitcher in the game is not even going to be the ace on his staff. Because I think, again, Walker Buehler better than Trevor Bauer. And looking at Trevor Bauer in his career, he's always had like that sub 4, maybe 3 ERA in some seasons. And the test with him is really going to come in this season. If you take a look at that Reds rotation, they had one of the better rotations in all of baseball. It's one of the main reason why they made the playoffs last season. They had Bauer, Sonny Gray, and Luis Castillo. Castillo is one of the top trade candidates right now in the MLB today. And Sonny Gray was kind of similar to Trevor Bauer. He was pretty good when he was pretty good in Oakland at the start of his career. Went to New York, kind of flopped, and then the second he got into Cincinnati, he became one of the better pitchers in baseball. He had some really good stretches both in this season and in last season with Cincinnati. And I want to see if Trevor Bauer Now that he's away from Cincinnati, how will handle that? Because we've seen Sonny Gray come into Cincinnati and dominate. We've also seen him with the Yankees and kind of struggle. So I kind of want to see if Trevor Bauer, maybe he is a changed pitcher entirely, or maybe it's a Cincinnati effect. That should be something that should be fun to look forward to this offseason, this next season.
Yeah, and I believe who the Reds pitching coach was actually hired by the Phillies, but he was kind of the guy that has really turned the Reds into somewhat of a pitching factory out there. And again, once these guys leave Cincinnati or a certain pitching coach, you're right. I mean, sometimes they aren't able to replicate it, so it'll be interesting. Um, Another thing I'm curious to see is, and it was kind of it ended up as a showdown between the two biggest markets in sports, New York and LA, which for me seems fitting for Trevor Bauer. I mean, he seems like a guy that wants all of the attention. It'll be interesting to see how he deals with the media out there, how he deals with the fans out there, because to be quite honest, I mean, he is a personality that might rub some people the wrong way out there. And it's not like in Cincinnati or, wherever that, he could just get away with it because, all eyes in this big of a market, all eyes are on you. 24/7. So it'll be very interesting to see how he kind of plays that out. And then heading to New York, the Mets offseason, and I know people have been down on Steve Cohen, and he's had a bad month in that I guess he missed out on this and Springer. Although again, this was more just because of Trevor Bauer not picking him. And then of course the whole Nintendo stock thing and him deleting Twitter. He's had an interesting month, but I personally, I mean, what are your thoughts on Steve Cohen's first offseason? I mean, I think it's a success just because of the Lindor and Carrasco trade, and he's shown that he's willing to spend money, and I think eventually he'll break through. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's strange that when you get probably the best shortstop out there in a trade, that some people can call this offseason a failure for Steve Cohen, because I think what people were expecting was he was going to come in and be this instant it would be this instant domino effect to where every single big free agent would sign with the Mets. Guys like Bauer, JT, George Springer would all pick the Mets and they would start this immediate dynasty. I think that's what some people were expecting. But a baseball team isn't built in one offseason. There's a lot of variables to kind of consider when building this team. Now, the positive of not getting guys like Bauer and Springer is they can sign guys like Michael Conforto, Seth Lugo, Francisco Lindor, who you just traded for. There are a lot of guys that the Mets have to lock up soon. And if you signed a guy like Trevor Bauer, that would have made it a lot harder to do that. And even with the Lindor and Carrasco trade, which is a huge boost to this Mets team, the Mets still got probably the second best catcher on the free agency market this offseason, James McCann, and they signed him well before JT. They picked James McCann over JT Realmuto. And they also got one of the better relievers on the market in Trevor May, who really helps boost up that rotation that bullpen as well. And even though they didn't get Trevor Bauer, they still managed to do a trade for Yordan Yamamoto, who could be kind of that fifth starter, long reliever kind of guy, or maybe he might be a starter until Noah Syndergaard gets back. But the fact that people are calling this a bad offseason for the Mets, I think it's ludicrous. I think that in his first season, when you're trying to build this team, trying to build this Mets team that had the pieces to be successful last year but wasn't, I think he did a pretty good job. But overall, this has been a interesting month for Steve Cohen, kind of with the stocks thing, like you said. But you can't call this a failure at all.
Yeah, I'm 100%. I agree with that. And I mean, this is still going to be a very good Mets team in my opinion. And look at the guys that they have to re-sign. I mean, just after this year, you got Stroman, as you said. All these guys are free agents, so this is a big year for them. And I think next year, I think it depends how much these guys re-sign for, they still may have some money to play around with in free agency, even after extending some of their big guys. So they'll probably be, again, one of the big players again next year and for years to come. So I don't really see this as a problem. To me, I think this is more just about they've got to, again, DeGrom is only, well, no, he's like third. What is he? He's 32. Okay, he'll be 33, I believe, during the season. So, you kind of figure you got to get the most out of DeGrom in the next 5 years. So that's kind of what they're building for now. And I think a lot of people felt, okay, maybe at this point, if you don't sign one of those big free agents like Trevor Bauer, they're not going to win the World Series. And now you're down to, I don't know, 4 more years of DeGrom. But I still think that during this window, they're going to be very good and they'll still keep signing people to supplement what they have. But again, I think right now, if you look at the way that this roster is constructed, it's all about DeGrom because I think he's the best pitcher in the game and he'll be 33 at the end of this season. So you gotta maximize what you have with him before he gets to like 38, 39 or whenever. I mean, who knows? Maybe he goes until he's 40. You never know when the wheels are going to fall off with the pitcher. But I think that's kind of what this is all about a little bit. Um, I do want to switch gears though and head over to the Braves in the NL East. They just made a big signing with Marcell Ozuna. What are your thoughts about what he does for that lineup?
First of all, I was really shocked that Ozuna would decide to go back. He had a great year in Atlanta, but part of that was because he didn't have to play the field that much. There was a universal DH in the NL, and Ozuna, he's not a great fielder in the outfield, so playing the DH really helped him out there. But now that there's not going to be a DH this year in the National League, I would have seen him going to a team like Minnesota, maybe Tampa Bay, to kind of be that DH on another team. But now Ozuna, he is going to have to play in the outfield, which does hurt defensively for Atlanta. But what he did last year with the bat, it was kind of similar to Freddie Freeman, who was his teammate who won the MVP award. And you could have made the argument for Ozuna to win the MVP. But if you're getting that Ozuna back in Atlanta, that Braves team is still looking very stacked. And they avoid a second straight offseason of losing one of their better bats in the lineup. They lost Josh Donaldson a couple of years ago, almost lost Marcell Ozuna there. But I think it was an interesting decision by Atlanta, and we'll see how they decide to work the outfield now with him in there.
Yeah, what's interesting is just before the podcast, I actually read that the Braves were actually in on Nolan Arenado and had kicked the tires on that trade, which would have been interesting. I think if they had done that, they probably don't re-sign Ozuna because the big thing lurking here is that Freddie Freeman, who is the best first baseman in the game right now, is up after this season. So, I mean, he'll be getting a contract. I guess he'll be 32. He's going to get 30 plus million a year easily. I mean, Freddie Freeman is just a machine at the plate. I sincerely don't know how people get him out. I mean, every time he plays the Phillies, man, it is just torture. But anyway, Marcell Ozuna, I kind of agree with what you said. If Tampa was actually willing to spend just like a little bit, they should have signed him because Tampa Bay needs the bats. That's what this postseason proved. I mean, if they didn't have the guys that they did step up, then they definitely would not have gone anywhere. I mean, Randy Arozarena carried that team. Without him, there was no offense. So they needed another cog to that offense to make it tick. And Ozuna would have been good for them, especially with the DH. So, I mean, again, for me, they're just one of those teams that it's frustrating that there's no spending, minimum because they should have spent on him. Ozuna, I guess he slots in the corner outfield. I mean, he's not the greatest corner outfielder, and now that he's going to have to play every day, that's going to be interesting. So, from what Fangraphs has here, you got Acuna and Ozuna in the corners, and then either Pache or Inciarte in center field. And Christian Pache is an outstanding center fielder. So he may take over for Inciarte because he's as good defensively, may offer more with the bat. But that's going to be a very good team, with the addition of Charlie Morton and Ian Anderson's development last year. I still think they win the East. What do you think?
Yeah, in my mind, the Braves are still the favorites in that division right now. Out of all five of those teams, they're the most proven, and they didn't get worse. I think they got a little bit better, kind of like what you said with the rotation that they have right now. And as a Mets fan, I can't really complain about the defensive side because of what we have going on right here. But with Ozuna slotting at left field, it helps that he's surrounded by such great outfielders in Acuna and Pache, kind of like you said. So I think that they'll be okay defensively. But I think what the key is, can he produce like he did last year? He had a breakout season in his terms last year, and we'll see if he can repeat that over a full 162 game season. I think that'll be the big key. But kind of something that you brought up before with Nolan Arenado, that was kind of a big story before Trevor Bauer happened, where he got traded from the Colorado Rockies to the St. Louis Cardinals. And now this was something that I didn't really see happening at all this offseason, just because of the money he was making over the next couple of years. But now Arenado moving to a contender in St. Louis. Chris, what do you think about that?
You know, the Rockies, first of all, as a Phillies fan, I'm never going to complain about our ownership again. And by again, I mean for the next 2 weeks, because I probably will at some point. But for the owner to come out and say, like, oh, I had thought about this trade 10 times in the last week and it didn't make sense. But like, the dude, if you're thinking that, why would you do it? Like, if you're thinking 10 times in the last week that this doesn't make sense and you still do it, then there's either A, something wrong with you, or B, it's a cost saving move, which is most likely what it is. But that just sends such a bad message to your team. Like, to say, oh, we're cost cutting on a team that I believe went like 72 and 90 back in 2019, and say, oh, but we're still going to try and re-sign Trevor Story after this year. Why would Trevor Story want to stay out there? I mean, look, they can take all the run they want to at signing him. I don't think Trevor Story is going to stay out there after this year. I mean, if I saw the best player on this team getting shipped out next to me, I wouldn't want to stay, especially if the team is already bad to begin with. And the other thing is I mean, Colorado had to take on a lot to ship out Arenado. I mean, they had to take on some money, and the prospects that they got back in return were not great. I don't know that they got a top 10 prospect out of the Cardinal system, and not even a top 100 one in all baseball, which for the arguably the best third baseman in baseball, that is just ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, it was a horrible trade for the Rockies, and it doesn't do much for a really weak farm system there. And I don't know what the way forward is. I mean, if I'm the Rockies right now, you got to trade Trevor Story. I mean, there's no sense in re-signing him. You got to trade Trevor Story, and there's some guys on that pitching staff that are pretty decent. Herman Marquez is pretty good. Kyle Freeland, maybe you get something for those, but I think you got to burn it down with San Diego and LA in that division. And now clearly you're not willing to spend. There's no reason to re-sign guys. So that's my thoughts on it, at least on the Colorado side. It was just a mess. How about you?
Yeah, I think there's no scenario looking at the Rockies where they actually won this trade. They didn't even get a top 10 prospect in the Cardinals system. I think the best they got was like number 13. And they had to give 50 million away to the Cardinals to make this happen. And they wasted some of the best years of probably one of the best third basemen in the game and one of the best players in Rockies franchise history. And it's just a shame to me that the best they did with Nolan Arenado on that team was, I think, one playoff run in 1 year where they didn't really make it very far. And it's just a shame that they weren't able to build around Nolan Arenado. They kind of wasted a couple of his years. And now looking at Trevor Story, there's no way why you wouldn't trade a guy like that. I mean, you're clearly not trying to compete right now if you traded your best player away. And you're clear. I wouldn't. imagine a way to sign Trevor Story and convince your fans that you're competing. I would just try and trade him with a year left on his contract that he has right now. Get as much as you can before he leaves you in free agency. Because from Trevor Story's perspective, I don't know why you want to stay, other than you get inflated stats in Colorado playing up there in Denver. I don't know why you'd want to stay in Colorado when they're clearly not trying to compete, and you can go pretty much anywhere you want and try and win that championship. And in terms of landing spots for Trevor Story, we kind of talked about this last episode. I don't think there's really a clear destination for him. I mean, there's obviously a lot of wild cards in terms of these trades, but yeah, go on to the St. Louis side. They obviously won the trade, but do you see them as World Series contenders now with Arenado?
Um, World Series contenders. I don't know. I don't think so because I mean, if you're talking World Series and you're talking, Dodgers, Padres, Braves, I don't think they're better than any of those three teams. I mean, they're a good team, but and they'll make the playoffs easily. But the Central is so bad. I mean, the Central is awful. I mean, I guess the Cubs finally added a guy in Jock Peterson, but other than that, the Reds have cut costs. The Padres, or not the Padres, the Pirates are just ridiculously cutting costs right now. Are going to be just terrible. I mean, I wish the Phillies were in the Central to get some free wins this year against them. Yeah, the Central is not good. Actually, the Brewers did make some additions we'll talk about later, but yeah, the Cardinals will make the playoffs, but I don't see it. I don't see them being World Series contenders in my mind. But they still have a good team. Jack Flaherty's very good. My thing is I think they needed some outfield help because right now they're running out like Tyler O'Neill, Harrison Bader, Dylan Carlson will be very good in right field. He's a young guy, but the rest of that outfield is just not that good. So yeah, they don't have enough offense even with Arenado uh, to really do all that much. So I don't see them making it too far in the playoffs, but I do think they make it there. That being said, anytime, I mean, even if they're not going to be World Series contenders, if you could get one of the best third basemen in baseball to play for you for free, because the Rockies are taking on all 35 million of that contract for next year. So essentially, when Arenado goes back to Coors Field and is hitting home runs for the Cardinals, the Rockies will be paying him to beat them next year. Yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer from St. Louis's side of things, and they didn't have to get rid of any of their guys like Dylan Carlson or Nolan Gorman or Matthew Liberatore. So yeah, I mean that's a huge win for them. I There's no way around that.
Yeah, I think it's clear that they're division contenders in a very weak NL Central. But looking at the landscape of just the National League in general, head to head against the Dodgers are better. Head to head against the Padres, I think the Padres are still better right now. And then looking at the NL East side, I think the Braves are still better. You can make a strong argument for a lot of those other teams in that division, like the Mets, like the Phillies, like the Nationals. Not really the Nationals, but I think you can make a strong argument for a lot of those teams. And I think a big reason why, kind of like you said, is the outfield. The Cardinals still have a really good infield with Goldschmidt, Paul DeYoung. They lost Colton Wong, but they still got Arenado. And the outfield is still a big question mark with that team. And they just traded away Dexter Fowler a couple days ago. So some of that depth now goes away. And Jack Flaherty still leads a pretty good pitching staff, not one of the best, but it always produces every single year. I think the Cardinals will easily make the playoffs with the division being as weak as it is right now. With the Cubs trading away Yu Darvish this offseason, they're clearly rebuilding. The Brewers are kind of in that like mid tier. The Pirates are the Pirates, and you have the what team am I missing? What team am I what am I missing?
Reds.
The Reds, yeah, they just lost Trevor Bauer, and they have rumors about Eugenio Suarez and Luis Castillo kind of leaving as well. So there's really only one clear team right now to win this division, and that's the only team that's clearly making moves to buy, being the Cardinals. So I think Arenado sets that clear that the NL Central belongs to the Cardinals.
Yeah, I mean, the only, the only team I could see theoretically maybe the Cubs making a run at it, but again, that offense. I mean, if you look at the lineup, Wilson Contreras is good, but like Javi Baez has to have a bounce back year because he's heading into free agency next year and had a really bad shortened season there. Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, so they've still got some pieces, but overall, I just don't. I mean, they're pitching. Yeah, Kyle Hendricks and Zach Davies are good. Then they're running out Alec Mills, who I believe this was him that threw like he was the one that threw the no hitter last year, right? I believe, and that might have been one of the flukiest no hitters of all time. I still refuse to believe that he's that good of a pitcher, but yeah, I mean the back end of the Cubs rotation is horrible. Their bullpen's not that good either. So yeah, I don't see the Cubs being too big of a factor. Maybe they give the Cards a run for their money. Colton Wong's a good addition for the Brewers. They've got Keston Hiura, who is, I think, going to be very good this year. I mean, he's got big time pop off the bat. I think at a full season, he gives you 25, 30 homers. So, they add him to a pretty good infield with him, Colton Wong. And then hopefully, for them, Luis Arias breaks out. But again, they're the same thing that I don't like a lot of their pitching. Brandon Woodruff and Corbin Burns were great last year, but Josh Lindblom, Adrian Hauser, Eric Lauer, not a great through 3 through 5. So in my mind, the offenses are kind of all even, but the Cardinals have better pitching, and I think that's what wins them the Central.
Yeah, I think one of the more funnier stories in that division that came out in this last week was former Pirates pitcher who they had for a couple seasons, and Chris Archer. He now leaves the Pirates after one of the worst trades in recent history, and he goes to the team that traded him. He signed back with the Tampa Bay Rays to a 1-year contract. And looking back when that trade was made, where Chris Archer was sent to the Pirates, they gave up a lot of their future. And now Chris Archer, he was the ace of that Rays staff, but now he heads back on to a rotation that just lost Blake Snell, but it kind of caps off that the Pirates lost one of the most lopsided trades in recent history.
Yeah, I mean what the Pirates have done. I mean, it is an abomination to baseball how bad they're being run. I mean, it is absurd. I quite honestly, I think this Pirates team. I mean, I got to go through the lineup. They might have a shot at being worse at some of these Orioles teams of the past couple of years. I mean, they are really going to be down in the basement. But as far as the Chris Archer trade goes, yeah, I mean that was a horrible trade. There's no way around it. I mean, I get that Glass now really only had a good 2019, and then 2018 and 2020 his ERA was in the low fours. But just looking at his raw stuff, he's got some of the best raw stuff in the league. I mean, he's popping like an easy 100, and then his off speed stuff is so sharp. It is. I mean, when he is on, he's really good. The problem is he hasn't found that consistency yet. But I believe in his stuff to be their number one pitcher. Um, Chris Archer, I'm actually a little bit surprised that they signed him because, again, what they're paying him, I kind of thought maybe that they'd just spend more and go with Blake Snell, but I guess they're really wanting to trim the costs there. That being said, I do think Chris Archer still has some left in the tank. He's struggled the past couple of years, but I see no reason to believe why he can't get back to being like at least I don't know, like a solid number 4 pitcher, low fours ERA. Yeah, I don't think he is what he was with the Pirates. I really don't think he's that bad. So it's probably a good get for the Rays, even if he was a little overpaid. But then also out of that trade, the Rays got Austin Meadows, and he was not as healthy last year. Didn't play the full season, but when he has played, he has been very good in 2018 and 2019. And I would assume he'll be able to rebound once he's healthy next year. So yeah, I mean, that trade was awful. I mean, especially if Chris Archer comes back this year and puts up, even average numbers, I don't know, high threes or something, Pittsburgh is going to be looking like complete clowns, like just complete and utter clowns.
I think they already do. I mean, I don't think there's a way where the Rays can lose on a signing. If Chris Archer has a bad season this year, it's a 1 year contract. They're not paying him that much. You can just cut him. But if he has a great season like he did when he was in Tampa the first time, then he adds on to a rotation that's still pretty good. He can be a 3 or a 4 on that team. And if he's good down the line, you could still sign him back to an extension. And that's easy. That's easy to happen because the Rays, they have that narrative where they kind of turn pitchers' careers around. Just happened with Charlie Morton a couple years ago. And they have one of the best bullpens in all of baseball every year. They just turned Blake Snell into a really good player, a Cy Young winner, and they've been doing the same for the past couple of years now. So I think there's definitely a case where Chris Archer can go back to what he was before, and it helps that he was already there at one point, and they made him seem like, at least to Pittsburgh, a top 5 pitcher in the game.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is a good signing for Tampa Bay, I think. I mean, you're right. I don't see how they really lose on that. Tampa Bay, though, and I want to switch gears to another free agency signing here. That's Nelson Cruz to the Twins. I thought that they were going to be in on someone like him, or Marcell Ozuna, one of those two, because they both bring that pop and high average hitting that Tampa needs. I mean, Tampa again. I mean, yes, they'll get Austin Meadows back, and that'll help. They don't have that guy like a Nelson Cruz or a Marcell Ozuna, though. But this is a great signing for Minnesota. I mean, Nelson Cruz, I can still remember back when I was living in Maryland, watching him with the Orioles, and all he does is rake. That's all he's done for his entire career. He's, I think, one of the best DHs of all time. I mean, he even in 2019, okay, and this was when he was 39 years old, put up 41 home runs as a 39-year-old. I mean, that's absurd. This guy, all he does is hit, as I said before. I mean, for him to get this kind of a contract, 13 million, when he's going to turn 41 during the season, I mean, congrats to him, man. I mean, he has had an awesome career, and I think that's a great fit in Minnesota. I think he'll fit really well with that team. They've got, guys like Max Kepler who've got really good power. Donaldson's got good power. The team as a whole, when they're healthy and hitting, they are a lot of fun to watch because of how much power they have. And they're going to have their hands full with the White Sox this year, but I do see them back in the playoffs and maybe finally lifting a curse there and winning a playoff series after a while.
Yeah, I'm just happy for Nelson Cruz in this case. He really capitalized off the shortened season, was up there in the home run leaderboards, and carried that Minnesota Twins offense to a playoff berth. And I get that they didn't do anything with that playoff berth, but he still provides a lot to an offense. He's a proven veteran, and to a lineup that has a lot of power year in and year out, that's a huge help to this Twins team. But every single year we talk about the Twins and them being playoff contenders every single year and World Series contenders every single year. And then they get to the playoffs and they lose in the first round. Don't even win a game in the playoffs. So they always need rotation help, and they just never seem to get it. They got Alex Callaway to help out in the bullpen. That's just bullpen help. They pretty much never get that proven ace in the rotation. I think they were trying to get Yu Darvish a couple of years ago, didn't get him. They could have gone after Trevor Bauer, but I don't think there's anything he wanted to do with Minnesota. And there's always aces out there that the Twins can get to help out that rotation and help out Jose Barrios, and they just never do it. And that always seems to be their downfall come playoff time.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, they're going to be kind of reliant on Kenta Maeda having as good of a season as he had before. And he had a phenomenal season last year in Minnesota. But other than that, and Jose Barrios, they just don't have the rotation help. I mean, Michael Pineda is okay. He had a good year last year. They added J.A. Happ this year, which is a pretty good addition. I think he'll make a fine, middle of the rotation kind of guy. I actually wanted the Phillies in on him. But then their fifth starter, Randy Dobnak, who, if I'm even pronouncing that right, I don't even know. I guess he did pitch a while there in 2020 and had around a 4 ERA. So I guess he hasn't proven himself too much, but he might be a decent back end of the rotation guy. But you're right; they don't have an ace. They have a lot of middle of the rotation guys, which is nice. But once you get to the playoffs, you got to have that guy that can take the rubber and win you every single time, like a Walker Bueller kind of guy. So we'll see. I mean, I think they'll be a good team. Do they have the power there to overtake the White Sox for the division? I don't know. I mean, the White Sox have a lot of guys that I'm expecting, big year over year growth from. Like if you look at a guy like Nick Madrigal, I expect he's going to be an on base machine for them this year, the White Sox at second base. And that lineup to me is really good. And then if you look at the pitching staff, they do have Lance Lynn now. That was an underrated trade that they made back in December, and he had a phenomenal year in Texas. Giolito looks like an ace. Dallas Keuchel's pretty good still. So, I mean, to me, I think that team is still a little bit better than the Twins. It's going to be a hard fought division, but I think it's between them two. And I think the Twins are not the Twins, the Cleveland baseball team, as they're now known, is probably going to sink below those two now and miss the playoffs this year.
Yeah, you forget that those three teams last year were all like separated by just a few games to get to the playoffs. And I think now it's going to be just a two-team race between, as you mentioned, Twins and Chicago. As Cleveland, they traded Francisco Lindor and Carlos Carrasco, and they traded Mike Clevenger during the season. I don't think they're going to really be competing like they did last year. So we'll see how that division shapes up, as it was one of the better divisions in all of baseball during the regular season. And then none of those three teams made it past the first round. So that should be fun between the White Sox and the Twins. And I think the final story we have, unless you have anything more after this, but the final interesting thing that happened, at least to me this week, was the Mickey Callaway rumors. He was the former manager of the New York Mets, current pitching coach of the LA Angels, and it came out there was a rumor that he got involved, kind of like the Jared Porter stuff with the Mets, where he was kind of inappropriately involved with a few different reporters, I think it was, or just a few different women. And now I think he got, I think it was it suspended by the team? I think he got suspended by the team just a little bit. I don't think they fired him yet, but I think he's still like on the team. But that was just an interesting thing that came out. I think the Angels were kind of eliminated from the Trevor Bauer race because Mickey Callaway was still employed by them. Obviously, they were together in Cleveland when Mickey Callaway was a pitching coach. But just an interesting story that came out.
Yeah, it seems like nobody wants anything to do with Mickey Callaway all around. I guess has it been rumored that the Mets kind of knew anything while it was going on or no?
I'm not too sure about that. I think maybe Sandy knew, but I can't confirm that. But there's another thing with the Mets where, I mean, they didn't know about the Jared Porter stuff. That just kind of happened when he was there, kind of came out when he was there. But I think there might have been a chance that he knew, but I can't confirm that.
Yeah, it is interesting, by the way, that he hasn't been fired yet. I mean, if this stuff, and I'm sure they're doing an investigation as we speak. I mean, if it's true, they have to fire him. I mean, there's no question about that. You cannot have that around the team. You can't have that in baseball. So I'm assuming we'll hear more about that pretty soon. But yeah, I mean, if I'm with the Angels right now, I mean, even if they find, you know, not quite substantial evidence, I feel like you got to get rid of him. I mean, it just seems like not only is this guy making poor decisions on the baseball field, he's making them off the baseball field too. So I mean, yeah, that seems like the next domino to fall, and just kind of the latest saga in some mismanagement in with the Angels organization. I do feel bad for Mike Trout out there, man. I mean, somebody's got to rescue him. That poor guy. And now Rendon's with him too. I cannot believe that he willingly went out there and is, probably not going to make it back to the playoffs anytime soon. But yeah, I mean that they are a mess out there, definitely, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that though soon. I did want to go a couple more things here. Back to the starting pitching market. Do you think that the Mets might be on a guy like Odorizzi?
I think he's going to be asking for a decent amount, like somewhere in the 3 year, 45 million range. I think that's what I've heard from Odorizzi. I don't think the Mets necessarily have to go after a guy like that. The rotation looks pretty fine the way it is with DeGrom, Stroman, David Peterson. You can move Seth Lugo into the rotation if you want, and then you have Carlos Carrasco. That's five right now until Noah Syndergaard gets back. So as of right now, and you got Yamamoto as well. So as of right now, it seems a little bit overcrowded, and it would have been overcrowded if Trevor Bauer signed there altogether. Right now, I think the Mets are done rotation wise. Maybe they can sign some outfield depth, use that money on a guy like Jackie Bradley Jr., or maybe get some bullpen help over there. But I don't think they necessarily need a rotation guy like Odorizzi. I think he'll be asking for a little bit too much. And I don't think the Mets really need a guy like that when they already have that rotation depth on the team.
Yeah, I agree. I think the asking price on that was 3 for 45, I believe. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think the Mets are that desperate for that either. I don't know. It's funny. I don't know who's really going to go after him. The only reason I said the Mets was because of the whole Trevor Bauer thing, but they don't have that urgent of a need for the middle of the rotation guy. So I agree. They probably leave that go. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. I actually haven't heard a lot of rumors about him. I would be wondering if Minnesota would take him back, reunite him there with the Twins on some sort of a shorter term deal, maybe. He seemed to fit in pretty well there, so maybe that would be my guess at the moment. But he's probably the best starting pitcher on the market. And then if you look at some of the other good players that are still out there, JBJ, like you mentioned, it's funny you say that about JBJ. I don't know that he would be an upgrade over Brandon. I'm not a fan of Brandon Nimmo, but he gets the job done in center field, and I don't know that you would really need to spend money on JBJ, especially because his asking price. Apparently, he wanted like a 6-year deal, which I don't know. He doesn't provide enough with the bat for me to do that, especially at the 31-year-old age for me to be giving him 6 years. He's going to have to come down off that asking price, I think, to get signed. But other than that, yeah, not a lot of big free agents left on the market. I think Trevor Rosenthal is probably the biggest relief market or relief pitcher on the market. But anyway, I want to go into now the NL East because I think it's probably the most exciting division. I think the other divisions have like two teams, like you'll the NL West, AL Central have two, good teams up at the top. The NL East has four teams. They could possibly have five teams over 500. How, in your mind right now, do you think it stacks up?
I think right now we were talking about this before with the Braves. I think that they are the division champions right now. They're a game away from going to the World Series. And I think that they're still the favorites until I'm proven wrong. They've won the division the last 2 years. They have the MVP, Freddie Freeman. And this is with Ronald Acuna. He had a slow start to the year last year. So I'm going to go with the Braves at number one. And then it's really a toss up from there, like with those last four different teams. I'm going to go with the Mets at number two, just because Francisco Lindor and Carlos Carrasco, those are both huge additions to that team. And the minor additions like McCann and May, they really help out at their positions. Like James McCann over Wilson Ramos. Defensively, I'll take that any day. And offensively, Wilson Ramos had a slow year last year offensively. And James McCann just a better all-around bat. And then Trevor May kind of adds on to that bullpen where hopefully Dylan Betances improves off his down year. And then you have Seth Lugo and Edwin Diaz over there as well. So I'm going to go with the Mets at number two. And then with the last three teams, I'm probably going to go with the Phillies at number three, excuse me. I think that JT Realmuto coming back, that's really huge for them. They just have to figure it out on the bullpen side. They got Archie Bradley on that team, but if they can figure it out with the bullpen, they have a lot of the pieces in the rotation with Wheeler, Nola, and a lot of those guys. I think they should be a third place team, and they've disappointed now for so long offensively down the stretch that I think they pretty much have to pull it all together at some point. And then I'm gonna go with the Marlins at number four. I think they made the playoffs last year. They got this. They got to second place in the division last year. And they showed that they had the pieces to compete for a whole 162 game season. But I think that they can pull it together. I don't think they really lost at any key positions. So I'm gonna go with the Marlins at number four, and then the Nationals. They came in They came in last place, excuse me, in last year's division. And I don't really know a scenario where they can compete. I think Max Scherzer, he had a down year for him. I mean, it was still a decent year for most pitchers, but for Max Scherzer, it was definitely a sign of decline. Steven Strasburg didn't play much, and Patrick Corbin kind of disappointed. They got Brad Hand in the rotation, but in the bullpen, excuse me, but that bullpen still one of the worst in the MLB today. And we'll see how Juan Soto does in a full season. But there's nothing really about that lineup that really excites me outside of Soto. So I'm going to go with the Nationals at five. And that might be a hot take from World Series champs to last place in the division back-to-back years. I think it will happen.
You know, I have to say, I mean, if the Nats, and I think this division will be pretty close. I mean, if the Nats get injuries and kind of tank, fall apart earlier in the season, we may have Max Scherzer on the trade block because this is his last year on that contract in DC. So, I mean, if he's pitching even decently, he could be a big name guy on the trade block. However, I am going to differ from you a little bit on the Nats. I'll get to my standings now, I guess. I got the Braves at number one. Adding Ozuna kind of cemented that. In a parallel universe, if the Mets got Bauer, um, the Braves did not sign Ozuna, I probably would have put the Mets at number one. But because of things playing out the way they did the last couple days here, I'll go with the Braves at number one. I mean, that lineup is just deadly. I mean, Acuna, Freeman, Ozuna, and d'Arnaud are a very solid 1 through 4. And then, of course, Ozzy Albies and Dansby Swanson, who aren't as consistent, but, when they're streaky, I mean, they're pretty good. Austin Riley still has a lot of power, and, I'm expecting bigger things from him. So, yeah, they're going to be a very good team. And then adding Charlie Morton, although he was a little bit down last year in Tampa, he adds some kind of a veteran presence to that lineup. Drew Smiley's another guy that was a really good pitcher last year in San Fran. And then, of course, the breakouts of Max Fried and Ian Anderson. So they have a solid 1 through 4. And then Kyle Wright, he definitely looked better towards the end of last year. So I do think they take the top spot. I do have the Mets second as well. That's going to be the closest battle, I think, between the Phils and Mets. The Lindor trade kind of cemented it for me, having him there. I just think that lineup doesn't have a weakness, to be honest. I could see maybe James McCann kind of just because he doesn't have that multi-year track record as much. He's been good, I think, the last year or two, but it's not like a 5-year track record. Maybe he regresses a little bit, maybe not. My other question will be Pete Alonso, because Pete Alonso did have a down year a little bit. He went into some pretty big slumps in there. And for power hitters, that's not uncommon, kind of a sophomore slump. So he'll be a fascinating watch this year. But yeah, I mean, that rotation with DeGrom, Carrasco, and Stroman will be really good. And then Peterson, and it looks like they have Lucchesi at the fifth starter. But yeah, I do think they'll be in second. Heading over to third, I got the Phils. Of course, I mean, they got JT and Didi back. And by the way, this is an interesting stat I read earlier. They led the most games this year through the season by 6 games. So again, that goes to show you. I mean, if they had a league average bullpen, I honestly think they make the playoffs easy last year. And their bullpen, again, though, they didn't add as much as I would like. Archie Bradley is a great addition. Jose Alvarado is nasty. He had a down year in Tampa, but his stuff is really good. But then they're kind of relying on Hector Neris being decent. Connor Brogdon, kind of breaking out like he did in the last couple of appearances last year. So I think they'll be okay. Chase Anderson, I think, is a good middle end of the rotation guy there. I think they'll be third. I have the Nats fourth, though, and I have the Nats fourth because Trey Turner and Juan Soto, to me, I love those two. Well, Juan Soto, I'm not I don't like playing against because he tortures us. Um, Trey Turner's a lot of fun to watch, though. And I think Kyle Schwarber and Josh Bell, while they may not hit for high average, will bring enough pop that was lacking behind Soto to give him at least a little bit of protection. To me, that team depends on Bell and Schwarber because if those guys are struggling, then people will once again be able to walk Soto or do whatever, and that's that. So we'll see if the protection for Soto works out. And then the rotation, is aging. Strasburg and Scherzer depends on those guys. Corbin had a bad year last year. John Lester is really old, so I don't know what you're going to get out of him. So, yeah, to me, that rotation that was once vaunted is kind of a question mark. And then heading to Miami, I have them at fifth. I love their rotation. Their young rotation is really good with Alcantara, Sixto Sanchez, who is an awesome young pitcher, kills me after that trade out of Philly. No, he's a stud. He's a stud. And but offensively, I don't really like that team that much. I mean, Miguel Rojas is good. Brian Anderson seems to torch NL East teams, but hit against nobody else. Starling Marte is okay, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the lineup is pretty mediocre there, so I have them at fifth. But as a fifth place team, they're better than any other fifth place team, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think what separated me from the Nationals and the Marlins was there's too much boomer bust on this Nationals team. You mentioned Josh Bell and Kyle Schwarber. They're both guys who are capable of hitting 40 plus home runs in the season, but they're also low average guys. And in Schwarber's particular case, he has a huge injury history. So there's potential to get at least 20 home runs from both those guys. But from what we've seen, their averages haven't been the best. And the age on the Nationals, you saw it in the rotation where they started declining, and they only added to it by getting John Lester. I think there's a lot less of that history with boomer bust on the Marlins, where you have a lot of these young guys who hit for high average and has some high contact totals last season. And there's a lot less age. This is one of the younger teams in baseball, and they were able to get a playoff berth despite of that last year. So I think that that's the main difference there. The Nationals' time, in my opinion, might be up. And if they can make the playoffs despite that, I'll eat my words, yes. But I think that is the main difference.
Yeah, I mean, you are right about Schwarber and Bell being very boomer bust. They still have yet to get that breakout, in my opinion, from Victor Robles, who, by the way, was their top rated prospect. I mean, even above Juan Soto, he was supposed to be the big prospect. And yet last year he was horrible in 52 games. He hit 220 with 3 home runs, 28% strikeout rate. That won't fly. In fact, I believe he had a negative defensive fielding and positional adjustment there, which is kind of shocking. So I mean, yeah, maybe that was a down year for him, but offensively he has yet to click. In his in his season and a half, he's hit, I guess, a combined like 240 with 20 home runs. He hasn't showed me a whole lot. He doesn't walk a lot. He has not shown me enough to tell me that he is the possibly generational player that I thought he might be coming through that system. without him breaking out, without Carter Kieboom breaking out at third base, and without Jan Gomes, being able to hit for average, because again, Jan Gomes had a good year last year where he had 284, but before that, his track record offensively was not that great. So I don't think he can repeat that. So, I mean, you're talking now about half the lineup not being good. They don't have enough guys that can get on base. So I do see your point there. Besides Turner and Soto and maybe Starlin Castro, I don't see guys that get on base. I mean, Bell and Schwarber will hit homers, but then go cold. And then, like I said, Kieboom and Robles, you never know. They're young guys that, in my opinion, have kind of underwhelmed. And then Jan Gomes is not as good as he showed offensively. So, yeah. And then Scherzer, it'll be a question of whether he's taken a step back. And Strasburg has durability issues, and you just never know with him. But what may be fascinating with this team is a lot of them are on 1-year deals. So, I mean, you could have an absolute monster trade deadline for the Nationals.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think this is a team that's put together for kind of like that one last World Series push with a lot of that rotation kind of aging where you don't really see much of a scenario where you can compete really much after this season. So I think you would definitely set up a pretty big trade deadline where the only untouchable guys would be Steven Strasburg because he's on a huge contract that just started last season. Juan Soto, who's your building star for the future. And then Trey Turner, I don't really see a scenario where they trade Trey Turner also. But I think you're looking at a scenario where everyone else, including Max Scherzer, could be put available by this Nationals team. And that's a definite possibility, especially with the way that the NL East is right now. That could easily happen where you could see a massive selling point for the Nationals as they don't have a really good farm system. So they can really try and build off that. And it's a farm system that only got worse once they traded for Josh Bell. They didn't give up a lot, but they gave up something. So you kind of want to build that farm system for the future. As right now, it seems like it's the Braves, Mets, and really just the rest of that division's time to really compete right now. And maybe the Nationals are thinking for the future.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the free agents they have after this season. It's Scherzer, Brad Hand, Starlin Castro, Daniel Hudson, Jan Gomes, John Lester, Josh Harrison, Ryan Zimmerman, Alex Avila. So they got a ton of guys. And I guess Kyle Schwarber, they have a mutual option on. So they got a ton of guys. And Trey Turner, they got to re-sign. I mean, he's going to be up after next season. And so, I mean, they got to extend him. They got to extend Soto, who still has some time. But yeah, in my opinion, if they're struggling, I I would say hold on to Soto and Turner and kind of bet that you're able to turn it around in 4 years and get both of them in their prime as the veteran guys and get some young guys up here maybe in 4 years from now. But yes, I think that if they are struggling at the deadline, I think you fire sell everybody except um, you know Soto and Turner and maybe Robles. But other than that, I think everybody's for sale. So yeah, but the NL East definitely I think is the most interesting division this year.
Yeah, I think the only reason why you can't, I put Steven Strasburg in there is because of the contract. But if there's a team out there willing to take on his contract after the injury history he had last year, and let's say he starts out really slow this year, I think it might be really hard to move him. That contract quickly becomes an albatross of a contract. But if there's a way that you can move Steven Strasburg in that scenario, by all means, do it. But this division, man, this is going to be probably one of the bigger stories all season with how just the NL East shapes out. And it's one of the few divisions in history where any team can win.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely more exciting than. I mean, I guess the NL Central, most of the teams can win it, but they're all garbage for the most part. Like whoever gets out of the NL East, I actually think could go to the NL Championship, unlike the NL Central. But yeah, about Strasburg's contract, I agree. I mean, he's getting paid $35 million a year through 2026. And if he has another year where he's hurt a lot again, I don't see him bouncing back. I mean, I really don't. Who knows? Maybe this year he gets healthy and is kind of able to go on a run for the next couple of years. But yeah, you're right. That could be a big issue for them going forward. And I I don't know who would want to take that contract if he struggles or is hurt this year. And the Nats already have a lot of deferred money. I mean, most of their contracts on Corbin, Scherzer, and Strasburg had a lot of deferred money. So they're in an interesting shape going forward. But for sure, the NL East will be one of the more fun divisions to watch.
Yeah, I think what makes it harder for the Nationals is that it's going to be very hard for three teams to make it out of this NL East to go to the playoffs, especially with the way that it's shaping up to be. You're most likely going to have one of the Dodgers or the Padres to take one of the wild card spots, and then you already have your division winner in the NL East. So that really only leaves one more spot out there for these four other teams to play the Padres probably on the road in the playoffs. Padres or the Dodgers on the road. So you're not going to have three teams most likely make it out of the NL East, and that could maybe entice the Nationals even more. Like, what's out there outside of this NL East. The NL Central is not going to do any good, but that one of the Dodgers or the Padres have to make the playoffs in some way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the NL East will probably get two playoff spots, I would think. I mean, unless the team in the NL Central surprises, and they could. I mean, look, the Cubs have a decent team, and they might just beat up on all the slop that is the bottom half of the NL Central, which gives them an advantage. I mean, the Phillies and Mets have to play, each other, and the Braves and all these teams a lot more. The NL Central gets to play each other, who are not good teams, so maybe that helps them out. One more thing I wanted to hit on, and I kind of hit on it earlier, but I was curious your thoughts about a salary cap floor and kind of a ceiling, because you see other sports, especially with the ceiling, doing this. And in my opinion, it should be in the next collective bargaining agreement. But what do you think?
I think you can definitely make a case for both. We were talking earlier about the salary cap floor. I think it's crazy that teams like the Pirates, teams like the Rays, just don't want to spend even when they're winning. Like the Rays made the World Series last year, and they did so with one of the lowest salary caps in the MLB, or one of the lowest payrolls in the MLB. And yet they traded Blake Snell away. Like, you traded away one of the best players on your team, a player that's won a Cy Young a couple of years ago. You didn't even get much back for him, and you basically did it just to save money. I think that just hurts the competitive balance in the MLB a little bit, as now the Padres are really helped out because they're a small market willing to spend. And in terms of the floor, the ceiling for that, I think you can make a case for it just because of what we've seen this offseason, specifically Trevor Bauer. You had that Bauer battle became a battle between New York and LA, two of the biggest markets in the country. And you don't really have a lot of these small market teams really in competition for him. Like, he was on the Reds in Cincinnati, which is a small market team, and he didn't even consider like going back to Cincinnati and taking that discount to play for a small market team. And I think there are a lot of guys who kind of rule out that small market team, and you have a lot of these battles between like New York, LA, Chicago, and they're always the teams with the most amount of money to spend, and they're the teams that are competing every year, like the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Cubs. They're always competing. So I think it would really help the teams out like Detroit, Kansas City, and Oakland, who are just forced to really focus on the talent evaluation in the draft and maybe make some minor trades. That's really how they compete. They don't really get a big free agent. They can spend low on a free agent and hope he becomes great, but they never really get a top free agent. Like, you don't see top free agents picking a small market team.
Yeah, it's as I grew up watching a lot of Baltimore Orioles, and that's a small market team. It was always either that or the Nationals, and can't stand the Nationals as a Phillies fan. But anyway, and there was always talk about Manny Machado, and people be like, oh, they're not going to resign him. And I never understood why. And, now as you kind of get to know what the owners do and just try and profit and spend as little as they can, some of them, it makes you angry because I mean, some of these teams, these small market teams, have some really good players that deserve better. They deserve to be able to stay there, like Manny Machado in Baltimore, or some of these other players like Snell in Tampa. They deserve to be able to stay there and get paid and have a team built around them instead of oh, sorry, we can't afford you anymore. It For a fan base, it sucks. I mean, it really does. And quite honestly, at some point you lose them because they realize that, look, I mean, as great as these Moneyball stories are, it shouldn't have to happen. I mean, there shouldn't be a team that has to spend 50 million a year, and even these teams that I say have to spend 50 million a year, they don't have to. It's their owner chooses to, but they should have to spend a minimum. And I think it's ridiculous. You see the same thing out in Colorado now. They had Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story. They had some pieces there, but their owner refused to put any more money in, and they weren't even near the luxury tax. They could have kept going and spent more money to build that team, and they didn't. So that it is a problem for sure. I mean, the luxury tax, people treat it like a hard cap. Just make it a hard cap, and there needs to be, I think, a hard minimum as well.
I think probably the biggest example of this comes recently with this Kansas City Royals team we saw back in the 2015 season. Like there are they're small market teams. Once they draft well, once they have that window to compete, it's really short. So these teams have maybe like a 2 or 3 year window to really take advantage of it. And most of them don't. But the Royals, they managed to make the World Series twice and then beat my Mets in 2015 in that World Series, and they took advantage of their opportunity. But they had a scenario where you had guys like Salvador Perez, Eric Hosmer, Mike Moustakas, Alcides Escobar, Alex Gordon. Like they had all these great players on that Kansas City team, but they didn't have any money to sign them. There was no way that they were going to offer more money than other teams so they can keep those players. So they lost a lot of those guys, like Mike Moustakas, he left for Milwaukee. Eric Hosmer, he went to San Diego. They were able to keep Gordon and Perez, but they couldn't keep a lot of those guys on that team because they didn't have a lot of money. Johnny Cueto, he went to San Francisco. A lot of those guys on that team they couldn't keep, and it's less of a big deal for this team because they managed to win the World Series. But for teams like Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, when their window runs out, Baltimore, when those teams' windows run out, it's just hard for them because they had their window, couldn't convert on it, and there's nothing they can do about it. They have to either trade those guys before they get into free agency because they know they can't sign them back, or just try and milk every single last opportunity you can out of them. But then you end up in a scenario like you do with Baltimore and the Tigers right now.
You perfectly explained that. Yes, I mean the big market teams like the Dodgers don't even have a window. They just keep going. The big market teams do that. I mean, even the Nats have kind of extended their window. These big market teams are able to do that. And you look at like 2014 Baltimore, and they went on to get swept in the ALCS by the Royals. They had a good team. I mean, if you look at, they had Chris Davis was on the decline then, but they had Manny Machado, Nelson Cruz, Nick Markakis, Adam Jones, all in their prime, in their late 20s, early 30s, and then Machado when he was 21. They had a good team, but the contracts were running out and they had to let him go. And that's the problem. These teams like a Baltimore or a Kansas City have 3 years and that's it. And, unless you're Tampa Bay or Oakland and, can rebuild through analytics and constantly draft and trade well to restock the farm system, your window is only 3 to 4 years. And then you go through like 7 years of tanking. I mean, as we see in Baltimore and Kansas City. So yeah, it is definitely a big problem in baseball. And I've heard complaints from, a lot of fans, and I think it would help small market teams bring people out to the park, and even the owners would get more money if they spent on their team and their team became better. People would go to the games and spend more. That's what doesn't make sense to for this about me. It's like, it's not like you're spending more and nobody's showing up. If you spend more, chances are you're going to be better and you're going to draw more fans. So it is a flawed system right now. And I think for the sake of some of these, smaller markets to continue to have baseball and bring people in, there will need to be something done about it.
Yeah, and I think that last thing you said about spending money, that really depends on just the city altogether. Like you have St. Louis, which is a small market team historically, but St. Louis has always been a baseball town. And whenever those teams not even are competing, but are just playing, those fans will come. They always come to that stadium in St. Louis just because they're a baseball town. They're like the Spurs they're like the Spurs of baseball. But when you have the Orioles and they're not really competing, you have this historic stadium in Camden Yards, just one of the best stadiums in the MLB, by the way. That stadium just doesn't get filled. Those fans don't show up unless their team's winning. But St. Louis, not every team can be a St. Louis, and that's really the problem right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. And I mean, who knows? Look, maybe the Rays building a new stadium, or the whole thing. I mean, apparently now there was talk about them splitting half the time between Montreal and Tampa Bay, which I have no idea how that would work. But yeah, I mean, it's a shame. Like you said, I mean, Camden Yards is one of the best stadiums out there. And it's funny. I mean, I grew up going there a lot and it was empty. And then I went there for 2 playoff games and it was mobbed and it was electric. And I was like, wow. I mean, where were all these people? But yeah, not everywhere is a baseball town. But again, if you spend the money and put out a good product consistently, I really do think you can change that. I mean, the Cardinals have been consistently good. And when you're consistently good, people turn out. I mean, yeah, usually I should say. So, but yeah, I hopefully something will be done in the next, competitive balance agreement there.
And with that, that is going to wrap up episode 2 of Top Prospects. For Chris Lemmo, I'm Logan Bourandas. Be sure to tune in to every episode, both during the rest of the offseason, during spring training, and then during the 2021 MLB season. That's all we got for this episode. Have a great day.
Thank you for watching this edition of Penn State Sports Night. If you're a fan of our content, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips. Also, follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we are Penn State Sports Night.